Thanks and welcome all. I'm meeting with you today from the land of the Muwinina people in Tasmania, and although I'm not a Palawa woman, I welcome you to my country and I welcome you to our conversation today. So I've had plenty of time to think in the last few months, and like all of you, you may have been spending quite a bit of time at home. But I've been thinking a lot about you, and there's something out of balance. I believe you're all giving away far too much value. So you see, it changed for me about 8 years ago. I was listening to what data a large financial services organisation had on its 14 million customers. This dashing gent was sharing the structure of the customer data that they had: transactions, merchants, dollar value, frequency of spend, time of day. And I remember it really clearly. He was wearing bank navy, perfectly tailored, of course. His suit was textured, not patterned. He wore a light shirt and a dark coloured tie, navy. He was in uniform, and I was in uniform, and everyone in the room was in uniform. The room was tiered like a lecture theatre. There were 250 people in the room. It had top floor views out over Barangaroo and Darling Harbour. And he was talking, and he was sharing that data was our future. And a spark of wonder came for me, a curiosity. The energy quickened and my heart started racing. And I looked around to see if anybody else was feeling the same thing. I sat forward in my seat, more attentive and listening with more focus. And quickly after that, two questions dropped for me. What are we going to do with the value of this data? And commercially, it had huge potential. But the second question, which followed pretty quickly afterwards, was how do we know that's okay? And that's when I took off my uniform. The response from the crowd was that it wouldn't be used for commercial purposes. There was no ethical framework required because it was unquestionable. It was non-commercial. It was for our information. It was to help us better serve our customers. 8 years on, it's a commercial service offering. It's a differentiated value add for business customers. It's an insight that you pay for as part of your service. They're not selling the data, they're selling the insight. So it's a commercial entity making millions in profit from data entrusted to the organisation for holding a bank account. So we've got a tension here now. On one hand, we're saying that's commercial reality, that's what business is. And on the other, saying, should that be okay? And once you see it, you can't unsee it. The rest of that room saw it that day and did nothing. They consciously chose to progress the commercial use of that data. I believe they have willful blindness. And that's what was in the room that day. And I hazard a guess that it might be a bit of it in the room today too. You knowingly hand over and use data without considering who should be earning the value it brings. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. The question I'd like you to ponder today is, will you go back to willful blindness, or will you catch this opportunity to transform your thinking about data? Transform where the big data is a revenue source only for businesses, or is there a potential for the individual to benefit from their own data? So I'm just going to share my screen, and as Ed said, I'm happy to take questions in the chat, and I'm going to keep an eye on that during the session today. So future of data, sovereignty or surrender. Do you know that on average, and I'm assuming that most of you are pretty tech savvy consumers on the call today, that on average you create 147 gigabytes of data every day. And why is this important? Say the data you create is a bucket full. Right? Your best mate does the same, and your partner, your workmates, your friendship group, and on and on and on. According to Domo, we produce 2.5 quintillion bytes of data every day. That's a billion. 90% of the data in the world that we create has been created in the past 2 years. And I am obsessed with the value of that data. I've had a long career spent convincing boards and executive teams and businesses why this data is valuable and why a customer is more likely to have a greater lifetime value to the organisation if we ask them to share this data consciously and collaboratively. I believe it can benefit an organisation greatly to lean in and engage with that. I've been around data for a long time. I've worked in banking, in retail, in tourism and hospitality, and in strategic and marketing roles. More recently, I've even lectured at university in regards to data and data quality. And I know that your data helps an organisation make a decision around where they'll play and how they'll win, how they'll make money from your data. But do you know what the real value of your data is? And it's an important question because without doubt, Facebook, Google, and Amazon have a lot of data on you. And they make lots of money from it. So they do that by making sense of that data as part of the collective data analysis. They chunk up to understand what it's saying, and then they chunk it down to segments, trends, behaviours, predictions, and suggestions. In April 2020, the market capitalisation for Facebook was $209 billion. Alphabet, Google's parent company, was $1.1 trillion US. Amazon's was $2.17 trillion. Now, of caution, these results are post-COVID-19 market impacts, so they were much, much higher than that. So we know they're worth a lot. What's not known is the financial value that your data has to them. In July 2019, 2 US Senators, Mark Warner and Josh Hawley, presented to Congress the Dashboard Act. Although it's not yet passed, it sought to force companies that had more than 100 million users to disclose the true value of the data back to their users, as well as reveal revenue generated by obtaining, collecting, processing, selling, using or sharing user data. And similar to the EU GDPR legislation, it would also allow users the right to delete their own data from companies' databases. It gave them the right to take back their value. So to me, growth in this type of legislation shows what I believe might be true, and that is we're giving away our value. So let's fast forward to the future. We're all living in a time where all our basic needs are met. Slightly utopian. We're living within our economical, sociological, and environmental means. And I'd like you to imagine a world where you know the positive impact of every cent that you spent and the origin of every dollar that you earn. This world is hyper-local and global. It allows you to know and choose and filter what your value is and what your impact is. It's a world where you get to choose who you share your data with and for how long and for what purpose. It's a world where you know this data has value and you can earn currency from it. So it might feel right now like we're a long way from that. Globally, we've experienced a collapse of trust. Our banking systems are in turmoil. Global companies are making billions of dollars from us whilst not converting to local tax dollars. And our obsession with lean manufacturing has come back to hurt many companies during this COVID crisis. In Australia, we're in turmoil after a summer of fires and an autumn of lockdown. Hundreds of thousands of Australians have lost their jobs. The COVID Safe app has everyone talking about whether or not their data is safe and whether or not that data will be used for appropriate reasons. But let's be clear. The future of civilizations, and indeed organisations, is focused on data, and more specifically the value that that data gives us. I want to talk about the future of legislation around data, and that future is open. Just get you to pop in the chat if anyone's heard of open banking. Give you a second or two to share whether you understand. Thanks, Michelle. Great to see you. Thanks, Michaela. Great. So open banking, which is coming to Australia in 2021, thank you, is going to give you control of the data that your bank and other financial institutions hold on you. It'll allow you to ask for that data to be shared with another institution on your request. You will get to control who holds the data and how it's used. It's going to transform the financial services industry. So we know that organisations collect data on us. We know that they do stuff with this data. So we've got your identification data, we've got your socio-demographic data, we've got your demographic data, we might have your financial data, and all of that is held separately or transferred separately or shared separately. When you bring it in and you layer it with behavioural and contextual data, it becomes information. And when that information is placed in a chain or connected to other pieces of information, it gives us insight, which gives us value. Sometimes we get rewards for that value. Sometimes we don't. So loyalty systems and rewards points have been part of that customer exchange with an organisation for a long time. But as that data has been commodified, so is the reward. I think it's something extortionate like $100 per dollar point spent on flybys. What if every human knew the value of their data and instead of getting stuff, got currency, real value? So what would that future look like? Let me tell you of a future where everything you do, feel, think and say is captured and stored in your own personal data vault. Scary, I know. Your banking data, your email data, your health data, your social preferences, your interaction with your mother, all yours to own and share and exchange for something when you want it. And you get to hold a portfolio of value as currency that you control the exchange of to whoever, for however long you choose to do that. In this future, you might be like the Facebook user who sold his data on Kickstarter for $2,733. I think he sold himself short. I believe that you all have more value and wealth than that. So Michelle's made the comment around the security implications of that data. Absolutely. And I'd like to show you in a moment where that is actually occurring in a secure way. But I wanted to tell you first about Lucy. This is Lucy. There are many organisations that know a bit about Lucy. They know she's 32, she's female, has Australian-born parents, she's employed and she's studying at university. Based on her student loan debt, she's been floating a little with her career path. She's false started a couple of courses and changed directions a few times. Instagram can see her first love and home is Tasmania. Her bank can see she likes to shop in a local whole food grocers and farmers market. And the whole food market knows she has a weakness for dark chocolate, little like myself. Facebook, Instagram, and her bank all can see that she loves a bit of online shopping. Mostly high quality classic pieces with a definite swing towards those that are sustainably made. They all know she's an Apple user because their apps and logins are used across her iPhone and MacBook, and she often uses Apple Pay to buy those groceries. Now, all of this is nice data to know, but it's even nicer if the organisation is able to connect it to other pieces of data, with Lucy's consent, of course, to make a decision about her. So they're able to connect it through a data aggregator to know a couple more things. There's another phone that spends most evenings near Lucy's phone, John. The organisation knows this because they both have Share My Location turned on with Google whilst they're doing their online shopping in the afternoons. Meet John. John is 34, he's male, Facebook knows he's a brother, and runs a men's support group for promoting better mental health. His bank knows he's saving to go overseas, and both him and Lucy have applied for a working visa to Canada, and they know that because they paid for it pre-COVID-19 lockdown. You see, the power is for the organisation to merge the pieces of data together to create chains of value. So now, the global digital population is 4.54 billion people. And with sensors and Internet of Things devices, the number of devices predicted to be connected to the internet by 2025 is 75 billion. Can you imagine the amount and value of the data collected by these devices? Now, let me tell you what you think would happen if Lucy owned that data she generated instead of the organisation. In a world where individual data sovereignty was a reality, what value would Lucy be able to get for her data? How would you and your organisations work with her to give her back her data? Then, how would you convince her to sell or trade back her data to create products and services that were completely unique to her? How could you lead this in your organisation? So let's look at what business as normal would be, where human beings are commodity units. What can organisations do? How can they do it? I note that Michelle's added, please don't say blockchain, but I'm going to talk about a blockchain startup. So Yabble is a blockchain startup out of Centrality in New Zealand, and they provide a platform where brands and fans meet. So in exchange for data, brands offer fans discounts and special deals on their products. And specifically in this space, it's to complete surveys and market research. So if the fan no longer wants to share their data, they simply turn it off, and all data is now prevented from being sent to the brand through the blockchain. It's a virtual data vault for that individual user. Another example is AHAU, another startup out of New Zealand. So AHAU use AI to secure and share the data of individuals, a community and a cultural group, and in this case it's the Maori. They want to ensure that the data is shared with value, sovereignty and cultural appropriateness. So an individual registers with AHAU, they share their information, and AHAU control the release of that data to different parties. Artificial intelligence makes this real by linking the data with the purpose and value of the data request, and then by ensuring that the right data is given with the right lens when it's shared. So thanks to COVID-19, we all understand exponential. That is the rate of growth doubling and the rate at which it grows at. So we know viruses spread that way, but we also know that technology use increases in that way. And I want to talk about convergence. So convergence is when you've got exponentially growing technology use converging with other paths of exponentially growing technology use, and they converge together. So AI and blockchain, or AI and big data, machine learning and big data. What that allows, that convergence, is an exponential leap. So how will we use the combination of these technologies to exponentially leap to true individual data sovereignty and to a new commercial model for data sharing? What would the combination of blockchain or big data and AI allow your customers to provide, allow your organisation to provide to your customers? And as an organisation, you can sit in complacency, so being driven by this willful ignorance that people will continue to share their data with us. Or you can sit and be impacted by legislation that allows individuals to claim back their data and expect fair value for sharing it. Now, as an individual, you can choose to continue to hand over your data and not expect fair value in return, or you can investigate ways to protect and then share your data. So there's a very great fear and anxiety that with the gap between rich and poor as these exponential technologies begin to grow, the literacy gap and the digital literacy gap are very real and very worrying. Digitally, many will fall behind. Tasmania has the lowest rates of digital literacy in Australia. Access to the internet is growing and emerging nations will have greater access than ever before. But it's the emergence of individual data sovereignty that ensures that growth in access comes with growth in wealth. So what is individual data sovereignty? Individual data sovereignty is when the individual gets to own their own data. They get to share and permit access to that data in ways that I describe this nirvana or this future that we have. But I want you to know that it's already happening today. YOUI already asks people, not assumes, to share their information in exchange for a reduced insurance premium. There are stories through COVID-19 of significant reductions in annual insurance premiums because people aren't actually driving anywhere. There's another organisation out of the US called My Data who looks at, here's my health data, and I decide which research I want to engage with. So they provide the vault, I enter my data, and then I choose or select the research projects that I want to participate in. We've also got Green Wallet. So Green Wallet is the ability to have a look at your carbon footprint based on any of your transactions that you have in your wallet. It gives you a rating. But what does all this mean? So if Nirvana is a personal data vault and individual data sovereignty, what does that mean for you? What does that mean for your organisation? How will you change and adjust your products and services to work with the customer to share their data with you? Which way will you go? So beyond open banking, they'll move into open insurance, open health, open education. All of our data will be legislated to be able to be shared with others through our control. And so I ask you, are we entering a stage of digital sovereignty or of surrender? Thank you. I now welcome some questions. So Michelle's put one in there that says, are these examples of the kinds of data that companies have to ask you about because they don't capture it? And or are they asking you for permission to collect it from your online footprint? And it's both. So at the moment, when you consent to cookies or you consent to a privacy policy or give consent to take a product or service from a company, often you're asked to check that you're happy to share your data, and you're happy to share it with third parties, even outside your organisation. So it can be a range of both. Were there any other questions? Oh, with Michelle, she meant the companies I talked about. So with YOUI, it's a fairly detailed interview where you share a lot of the information about how far you travel. There are other organisations that, particularly in logistics and in trucking, that will partner with an organisation to have an IoT device or some form of device actually attached to the truck, where they're knowingly sharing in order to reduce the insurance premium. Thanks, Michelle. Good questions.
I've got a question about the data that you, this is disembodied Ed here, about the data that you talked about at the start, about the amount of information that you're giving away and
yeah,
uploading.
147 gigabytes a day.
All right. Where did that figure come from, and who?
Yeah, so I certainly got it. I got the information from Forbes, but it was a projection based on the number of digital online users and the volume that was being produced on a daily basis, and an average for an individual.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thanks. I don't know if you've noticed, but in Q&A, there's a question there that's coming from there. So that's another way to collect questions, if you'd like. Two
from Shree. Thank you. On existing data regulations by countries, I would definitely have a look at anything that sits under GDPR or personal data sovereignty. I would definitely have a look at anything that sits under open banking. Even just the term open banking brings up the UK experience and some of the other European experiences around that. And on best practice around how companies are working with consumers. So there's a number of different publications. I get most of my information from MIT or HBR, which gives me links down to relevant articles around how data is being self-managed. But we can certainly share some after the piece today. After the presentation today, I can share some more with you. And Christina's joined. Hi, Christina. Ed's asked, what's the legislative landscape about data privacy like in Australia and New Zealand compared to other places? So interestingly enough, when the European Union introduced their privacy data, which was about 3 years ago now, Australia brought in a new privacy commissioner. It was pretty well bet that that data would actually, we would do the same. And so part of that legislation says, I hold the right that by transferring data to you as part of an exchange for whatever service you might be offering, so it might be a hotel room or anything like that, that I have the right to request that that data about me be deleted. So Australia is not there yet. I don't believe it'll be very far off, but at the moment it's actually quite strong. So in terms of the protection of the individual and disclosing the data and the conditions at which you disclose that data or share it with other people is quite strong, but that ability to have that right to be forgotten is not there yet in Australia and New Zealand legislation, but I don't think it's far away. Any other questions? I think what's really exciting about this as a concept is that you get to really think about that customer journey. At what point do we attract somebody and ask them to engage into sharing their data with us? And we do that at the moment as an organisation or as a company, but we do it with the expectation that it's given as part of the agreement to do business with us. What if that table had been turned and we had to actually encourage a customer to want to participate in sharing data with us in return for something? And it becomes a completely different commercial paradigm. It becomes do you go down the broad product spread where you hope to attract as many customers as possible, or do you go down that really tight vertical that says, actually, we're going to create products that are really unique to the individuals that we work with? And Shane's asked a question there around what does right to be forgotten balance with auditability and traceability of transactions, or how does it? So right to be forgotten, the traceability of transactions still exist, particularly with things like credit card transactions. PCI compliance requires that the information around the specific details of the credit card are hidden throughout the transaction and exchanged only as required. So the transaction still exists, and it still exists in the individual's banking data. But the person who is the hotel or the service provider in the middle is actually required to remove any information about that individual that they might have. So addresses, phone numbers, names, passport numbers, things like that. Ed's asked the question, how actively are companies thinking about it from my point of view? It's an interesting one. I think particularly in banking, it's really front of mind. So the stages of open banking, the first stage is that a bank is required to share product information with other institutions. So it could be conditions of accounts, but non-specific to individual customers. The second way that wave of open banking means that we've got to have a key, and it's got to be built into systems where, so it might be internet banking or mobile banking, where an individual comes and says, I want you to unlock that and share that with this organisation because I'm going for a loan or I'm going for a rental agreement. And that needs to be in place by the end of 2021. Michelle says, I guess the implicit trade is often your data for more convenience. Absolutely, yeah. It could also be for much more tailored product. So if you think of a product not as kind of a standard commercial product that we buy, like a camera or a phone, but if you think of the product as education. So if I decide to share my data around my education, there's a great company, Go1, who's doing quite a bit of work around that at the moment. If I share my data around my education and things that I've learned and the skills that I've learned and the competency level that I have in a particular skill, the more likely I will get education courses and programs and workshops that are served up to be exactly meeting my needs. So if I'm an audible person or I learn through sound or through hearing somebody do something or talk about something, and I get greater results in skills and competencies as a result of that, then an algorithm may be able to, from that company, serve me up training that's really validated to my individual data. Does that make sense, Michelle? And Ed, interested in green wallet idea. Yeah, I'm really, really excited about this startup. So it's the idea that you can effectively go to a local market, or you could go and buy a vehicle and understand what your carbon footprint is as a result of that purchase. You can also test the water with it so that you can understand what it is before you buy it. And that way you can reduce your footprint or offset or buy carbon credits to offset that purchase. Are there any other questions? Great. Oh, we've got one from Sue, thank you. What about the government COVID-19 tracking app? Yeah, so why don't they share their code to support or prove their data security? So I do think, Sue, that towards the end of last week, they've actually determined that they will release that code. One of the key things that they were keen to prove out and audit first was that security. Prior to allowing others to step in or find vulnerabilities in that code. So I do think that they're on their way to releasing that shortly. Michelle says she's thinking of the current state. There's a lot of work implicit in building up and owning your one profile to rule them all, the master data file, yes. When someone can harvest your LinkedIn and target you that way with no extra work from me, hence convenience. Yeah. Yeah, so it's holding the key to whatever that true data file about you actually is. And, you see it now because you can use your LinkedIn password to log into other things. So it's the automatic sharing of that data. But at the moment, LinkedIn and Microsoft benefit from that data sharing. you get the convenience, but it's the exchange saying, I want to make things simpler for me, so therefore it's worth handing over this data. What if we amp that up a little bit more and I only got presented with opportunities or articles or things that were absolutely relevant to the way that I needed to consume the information, and therefore I might be more in a greater position of power to choose to share that information or not. Great questions. Fantastic. Well, thank you all. Thank you, Ed. Thank you for having me today, and Lisa.
It's no problem. Thank you very much.
Yeah, really super happy to share links to some of those articles that we talked about for Shri. And if you've got any further questions, feel free to reach out.
Yeah, where can people find you?
Yeah, so I'm on LinkedIn, obviously. That's actually my #1 data source. But I'm also a faculty member with